Harold Reed, a successful construction company owner in a quiet Midwestern town, had always considered himself a man who knew what he wanted and exactly how to get it. His family, known for its hardworking men, had spent decades building a future on solid foundations. To them, construction wasn't just a job. It was an honor, a legacy passed down through generations like a treasured heirloom. For Harold, continuing the family name and preserving the family business were two sides of the same coin. Since his youth, he had dreamed of having a son, a boy who, just like him at 20, would grow up in muddy boots, lifting beams, studying blueprints, and learning how to run the company built on the bricks of relentless effort. When he married Anna, a gentle yet strong-willed woman with kind eyes, that dream took on new life. Anna supported Harold in everything. She was one of the rare people who understood that behind his stern gaze lay deep emotions and aspirations. Together, they imagined their son, strong, determined, ready to take on the challenges of the modern world and continue the Reed dynasty. When Anna became pregnant, Harold was over the moon. He was convinced that in a family where 3 generations of men had been born in succession, another son was inevitable. Friends and colleagues patted him on the back, grinning as they congratulated him on his future boss. Even Anna, laughing, playfully called their baby Little Harry. But everything changed on a warm June evening. Harold stood in the hospital corridor, his hands trembling slightly, his heart pounding like a hammer. Behind the closed doors of the operating room, Anna was screaming. His usual composed, almost cold demeanor gave way to restless pacing. He was trapped between the joy of expectation and the fear of the unknown. Finally, the door opened and the doctor stepped out. His face was exhausted but beaming with happiness. "Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You have a daughter." Harold froze. "A daughter?" The word sounded so foreign that it took him a moment to grasp its meaning. A whirlwind of future images raced through his mind, but they felt strange and unfamiliar. Instead of a boy playing with hammers and blueprints, he suddenly pictured a girl with pigtails and a dress. Disappointment? Maybe. But it lasted no more than a second. When Harold walked into the hospital room and saw Anna holding a tiny bundle in her arms, everything changed. Anna was smiling, her eyes gleaming with pure joy, and in that moment, he understood. His child, his flesh and blood, had already won his heart. "Meet her, Harold," Anna whispered. "This is Sarah." Harold leaned over the bundle and gazed at his daughter. Her face was red and wrinkled, her tiny fists clenched. She looked so fragile, so different from the heir he had imagined. But then she opened her eyes. They were bright, like a summer sky, staring straight at him, as if trying to see into his soul. Something inside Harold shifted. He realized that his dream of an heir didn't have to be defined by gender. Yes, Sarah wasn't the son he had expected, but she was the one who gave his life a new meaning. Instead of disappointment, an overwhelming sense of pride took its place. In this tiny being, he saw the strength, determination, and passion for life that mattered most to him. "You'll be just as strong as any man," he whispered, gently touching her tiny hand. Sarah responded by wrapping her fingers tightly around his. From that moment on, Harold decided that his daughter wouldn't just be a part of his world, she would be his pride. He would teach her everything he knew. She would grow up strong, confident, and capable of running the Reed legacy. She would be the first woman in their family to take charge of the business. Of course, it wouldn't be an easy path. In a small town where tradition was everything, and men had always dominated the construction industry, the idea of a girl leading a company seemed absurd. But Harold refused to back down. He knew Sarah was his chance to prove to the world that strength and talent had nothing to do with gender. Weeks passed, and as Harold spent more time with his daughter, he realized his love for her grew stronger each day. She was curious, energetic, and, despite her young age, already showed signs of his resilience. Anna, watching Harold dote on their little girl, simply smiled. She knew their family would be unconventional, but it would be happy. And so, the story of Sarah Reed began. A girl destined not only to break stereotypes, but to become the pride of her family. For Harold, it was a new beginning, one he had never envisioned, but one he now couldn't wait to embrace. Sarah grew up under Harold's watchful eye. Her childhood was far from the traditional idea of little girls. Instead of dollhouses and tea parties with teddy bears, her world consisted of her father's workshop and the noisy construction sites. It was there that she learned resilience, analytical thinking, and the basics of a trade that many considered to be a man's domain. From the start, Harold believed Sarah was capable of more than the stereotypes dictated. When she was 7, he took her to the construction site for the first time. That day stayed with her forever. She stood in a helmet that was too big for her head, her eyes shining with curiosity. Harold showed her how excavators worked, explained why the foundation was the base of every building, and even let her drive the first nail. That moment became something of a rite of passage for her. As the years passed, Sarah quickly realized that her father wasn't just a builder, but a man who believed in the power of knowledge and hard work. He encouraged her to succeed not because he wanted her to, but because it was part of her path. "You can do anything if you set your mind to it," he told her every time she faced challenges. In school, Sarah stood out not only for her determination, but also for her unique independence for a girl her age. Teachers admired her ability to solve complex problems, and classmates often sought her advice. Neither math nor physics intimidated her. She knew that these skills would come in handy in the future if she decided to follow in her father's footsteps. By the time Sarah hit her teenage years, her life became even more eventful. Seeing her interest, Harold began teaching her more advanced aspects of managing a construction company. He took her to business meetings, showed her how to close deals, and explained why it was important to balance quality and cost. Sarah didn't just listen. She absorbed every word. At 16, she surprised Harold by designing a small project for school all on her own. It was a model of an eco-friendly house, which won first place at the science fair. Harold was so proud that he hung her certificate in his office next to a photo of his first construction crew. After graduating high school, Sarah enrolled at one of the country's top universities, choosing a major in architecture and construction project management. The studies weren't easy for her, but she never backed down. She called Harold often to share her progress or ask for advice. Every call strengthened their bond, which neither distance nor time could break. At university, Sarah proved herself to be a true leader. She became the class president, organized student projects, and even worked as an intern at a construction company. Her mentors noted that she wasn't just a talented student, but someone willing to take on responsibility. After graduation, Sarah returned home. She walked into Harold's office with her diploma in hand and said, "It's time to build the future together." Harold, struggling to hide his tears, stood up, hugged her, and said, "Welcome to the team, Sar." Now, Sarah wasn't just his daughter. She had become a full partner in the family business. Her energy and modern management approaches breathed new life into the company. Harold watched her work with pride, knowing that she had already exceeded his expectations. Sarah knew their path wouldn't be easy. She would have to face industry challenges and fight against the prejudices of those around her. But she was ready. After all, she had been raised by a father who believed that nothing was impossible for a person with courage and determination. When Sarah first started working with Harold, their partnership felt like the beginning of a new era for the Reed family. Harold, seeing his own reflection in his daughter, proudly watched as she took her first steps in running the company. But life, as it often is, can be cruel. One chilly morning, just as Sarah was preparing for a meeting with clients, she got a call from the hospital. Harold's heart, the one she thought was as strong as he was, suddenly stopped. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening. Fragments of their conversation the day before flashed through her mind. Her father had talked about a new project and joked that now she had a better chance of bringing fresh ideas to the table than he did. And now, he was gone. When she arrived at the hospital, she saw his still body, and it felt like the world around her had stopped. The funeral was a trial. Colleagues, family friends, company employees, and even competitors came to pay their respects to the man who had dedicated his life to building not just homes, but trust. Despite the pain, Sarah stood tall, just as her father had taught her. She knew he wouldn't want to see her broken. After the funeral, the house, once filled with his voice, seemed empty. Sarah would go into her father's office, run her hand across his favorite chair, and look at the blueprints he'd left on his desk. Her eyes lingered on a note written by him. "Trust yourself, Sar. You'll make it." Those words became her anchor in the stormy sea of emotions. But reality didn't give her time to grieve. As soon as news of Harold's death spread, competitors began trying to take over the company. They doubted that a young woman could handle such a heavy load of responsibility. Sarah knew this was a challenge, one that would not only define her reputation but also the Reed family name. Summoning all her strength, she returned to work. At first, it was incredibly difficult. Every corner of the office reminded her of Harold, and sometimes when she was alone in her office, she would let herself cry. But despite the internal pain, Sarah made decisions with cold, clear logic. She conducted an audit of the company, reorganized departments, and refreshed the approach to their work. In her actions, you could feel the same determination that her father had instilled in her. Her first major test came with a contract for an office building, which was on the verge of falling through. Competitors were trying to steal the client, claiming that Sarah wouldn't be able to complete the project on time. She personally met with the client, explained the project details, proposed improvements, and insisted that her team was more than capable of delivering flawless work. Her confidence and professionalism convinced the client to stay. Gradually, her authority grew. Sarah proved she was not only able to keep the company afloat, but also take it to the next level. She began implementing modern technologies, which sped up construction processes and cut costs. Her success led to a shift in how competitors saw her. Those who had doubted her abilities at the start began to treat her with respect. But despite all her professional achievements, Sarah felt lost in her personal life. Without Harold, she lacked her rock. She often caught herself thinking that she had no one to share the joy of victories with or bounce new ideas off of. She missed his wise advice and warmth. Her home, filled with memories, served as a constant reminder of what she had lost. Sarah tried to find solace in her work, but she knew it wasn't enough. Sometimes she would step out onto the porch and gaze at the stars, remembering how Harold had told her about his dreams. Those moments gave her the strength to keep going. She knew her father would want her to be happy, no matter what. And so, Sarah kept moving forward. She became not only a successful businesswoman, but also a symbol of resilience and strength. In every completed project, in every new achievement, she saw the reflection of what her father had taught her. And although her heart never stopped aching, she firmly believed that Harold was proud of her. Sarah hadn't visited her construction sites in a while, but today she finally decided to check on one of the most challenging projects. It was early morning, and the streets were still somewhat empty. With the first rays of sunlight peeking through the clouds, Sarah was enjoying the quiet before the start of the workday when something on the construction site caught her eye. The workers, loudly chatting with one another, looked tired yet focused on their tasks. They seemed so far removed from her own world. Usually, Sarah managed everything from her office chair, reviewing reports and overseeing progress, but today, she wanted to immerse herself in the reality of actual construction. She walked past the machinery, feeling the crunch of gravel under her shoes. In the distance, she spotted a man who seemed to embody everything Sarah had ever hoped for. Focused, friendly, and incredibly hardworking. He was tan, wearing a worn-out shirt with a serene expression on his face, easily directing his colleagues without losing an ounce of enthusiasm. Sarah stopped at the edge of the site, observing him. He wasn't like the stiff, formal types she was used to working with in the office. Here, among the massive machines and dust, his face shone with kindness and confidence. Her attention was drawn to how he was gesturing while explaining something to one of the workers. His smile was wide, and his eyes sparkled as he encouraged the man, even though the job was tough. Sarah couldn't resist approaching. "Hey there," she called out as she walked up to him. The man turned around and his face lit up with an honest smile. His voice was warm and soft, full of energy and care. "Hey, how can I help you?" he asked, not the least bit surprised by her approach. "Just checking out how things are going. Everything all right?" Sarah took a small step back, not wanting to get in the way. "Everything's great," he nodded, continuing to direct the workers without missing a beat. "Say you, not from around here?" No, just came by to see how things were going, Sarah replied, her gaze unintentionally lingering on his hands, strong and worn from labor, yet with a kind of quiet grace. She was mildly surprised at how this simple man left such an impression on her. Well, nice to meet you, he said. I'm Jack. Sarah nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of connection between them. In the short time they spoke, she felt at ease with him, as if he were an old friend she could talk to about anything. Days passed, and Sarah returned to the site more often, each time finding Jack's company warmer and more understanding. She tried to keep her role in the company a secret, not revealing that she was in charge. Jack seemed genuinely interested, his eyes always filled with kindness, listening to her as though she were the most important person in the world to him. Despite the differences in their social standings, the gap in the world they inhabited, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. Sarah found her heart racing whenever he was nearby, and his good-natured demeanor and respect for her made it hard to ignore the pull she felt. Their conversations became deeper, and sometimes they'd sit for hours on an old wooden crate, talking about everything from personal struggles to dreams of the future. One day, Sarah visited the site with some colleagues to discuss changes in the project. As she approached one of the workers, she heard a voice call out, "Miss Reed, how's everything going? All on track?" She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was familiar, it was one of the company's managers. But that wasn't what made her pause. She hadn't expected to hear her full name with the Miss attached on this construction site among people she'd just been speaking to as Sarah. Jack, standing nearby, went quiet instantly, his face darkened with confusion. Sarah felt her shoulders tense as Jack's expression shifted to one of caution. It seemed like he couldn't believe that the woman standing before him wasn't just a random stranger, but the head of the entire company. "Sarah," he said softly, his eyes searching for confirmation. You're the boss? The CEO?" Sarah didn't know how to respond. She was used to playing the role of a tough leader, but with Jack, she felt like more than just an employee. She felt like a woman valued for her true self. She didn't want to break the world they had built together, but she didn't know how to return to it. "Yes," she said, knowing that words wouldn't change the reality. "But I'll always be Sarah to you." Jack was silent for a moment, then a small smile tugged at his lips. "Well, Sarah, you're still the same person I met, and that's what matters." His words were filled with sincerity, and it brought Sarah an unexpected sense of relief. They stood there in silence. But for Sarah, it felt like a promise that things between them would stay as natural as they'd always been. And although things had changed, she felt that with this man, she could still be herself. That moment, when she revealed she wasn't just a woman, but the one who decided the future of so many, didn't cause any distance between them. On the contrary, Jack saw something even deeper in her. He wasn't with her because of her status, but because she remained the same genuine woman he had met. Every conversation they had now carried more weight, and the feelings growing between them only grew stronger. Sarah realized she was ready to take a risk, to move forward with this relationship despite all the differences in their worlds. With Jack, she felt she could be not only a strong woman, but someone capable of loving, being loved, and embracing vulnerability without fear. And though everything was just beginning, she knew one thing for sure. Jack was the one she wanted to build her future with. Sarah never imagined that marriage would bring her not just joy, but such trials. After she and Jack made their relationship official, she was sure their future would only hold happy moments. The wedding, which she had funded herself, was beautiful, a celebration of love, complete trust, and faith in a bright future. But reality turned out to be much more complicated. A few weeks after the excitement of the wedding died down, and as they were settling into their new home, Jack suggested they take a vacation. It was supposed to be a time for just the two of them to recharge, enjoy each other's company, and unwind. But Jack suddenly added that his mother, Mrs. Watson, had decided to come along. "Are you serious?" Sarah didn't hide her surprise and disappointment, but she tried to speak calmly. "Well, she hasn't had a vacation in a long time, and I can't leave her alone," Jack replied with a slight edge to his voice, making Sarah feel guilty. Though Sarah wasn't thrilled with the idea, she figured it might help strengthen their relationship. She herself had grown up in a big family and always thought that family support was a crucial part of life. But even she couldn't have predicted how much of a nightmare this trip would turn out to be. When they arrived at the luxury resort town on the coast, everything looked like something out of a fairy tale. The white sandy beaches, emerald waters, and tropical forests. But something inside Sarah had a bad feeling. Soon, she realized her instincts had been right. Mrs. Watson, a middle-aged woman with perfectly manicured nails and an ability to control every word, immediately took charge. She began dictating where and when they would eat, how much they would spend on souvenirs, and of course, everything had to be covered by Sarah. Mrs. Watson, with an unwavering expression, would ask Jack to choose expensive restaurants, and without hesitation, would tell Sarah, "You understand we can't settle for anything cheap, right? This is a vacation. Everything should be the best." Every day became a small test. Sarah barely caught the restrained glances from Jack, who, instead of supporting her, weakly defended his mother. "Mom, she's not against it, right?" His voice almost pleading, and Sarah felt her heart break. She could tell Jack was pulling his support away, leaving her alone to deal with Mrs. Watson. Sarah endured. Watson continued to manipulate, making more and more demands. One evening, she threw a scene at a restaurant, insisting they get the best table, even though there were plenty of seats available. "I know how important this is for people like us," she said, throwing Sarah a glance full of hidden contempt. "You want us to look good, don't you?" Sarah tried to explain that they didn't have to spend a fortune to appear worthy. But Mrs. Watson just laughed. "Sweetheart, if you think money doesn't matter, you've got a lot to learn. Everything I'm doing is for your own good." That night was a turning point. Mrs. Watson didn't stop with the restaurant. She began negotiating with travel agents, picking extravagant excursions, and unapologetically forced Sarah to pay for all of these costly experiences. When Mrs. Watson decided to go shopping, not only did she demand Sarah foot the bill for her purchases, but she refused to settle for cheaper options. "This purse looks like something bought on sale," she said, looking at a bag that would have been perfect for an average traveler. "You don't want me to look cheap, do you? That's not good for you. You want everyone to think you're a worthy wife, not some failure." Sarah could feel her patience running thin. Of course, she couldn't afford an open confrontation with Jack, but her inner turmoil was becoming more obvious. Every day with Mrs. Watson was an emotional battle, but what truly shook her was Jack's support. Instead of backing her up, he increasingly blamed Sarah for not knowing how to behave in proper society. "Sarah, can you at least try a little harder? Mom just wants us to have the best," he said one evening when she suggested returning some of the unnecessary purchases. Sarah couldn't believe her ears. Her own husband was accusing her of being greedy when Mrs. Watson was doing everything she could to drain their budget. In that moment, Sarah felt utterly betrayed. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly held them back. She couldn't afford to be weak anymore. She decided it had to end. Mrs. Watson's manipulation wasn't just a waste of money. It was an attempt to break her down. Sarah wasn't so easily fooled. That night, when everyone was asleep, she quietly got up, took her phone, and dialed her lawyer's number. "I need to talk. This isn't just a vacation, it's a real test. I think I'm starting to understand what's really going on." Sarah knew there would be a fight ahead, but she wasn't willing to back down anymore. She was ready to take control of her life and her family. Mrs. Watson would no longer run her world. And Jack, despite everything, needed to understand that for Sarah, honesty and support were more important than playing into anyone's manipulations. That day started like any other. Sarah quickly got ready in the morning and headed off to work, just as she always did. However, when she came home that evening, her life took an unexpected and painful turn. Jack was waiting for her in the hallway, with that look on his face she had learned to recognize over the past few months. A venomous glare, clenched lips, and fists nervously opening and closing. He was angry. Sarah felt it in the air. Something had changed. Something wasn't right. She had gotten used to the silence and the hidden hostility that came from Mrs. Watson, but now Jack was filled with something more than just irritation. "We need to talk." His voice was low and tense, and his words echoed in the quiet of their home. She froze in the doorway, instinctively understanding that this was the moment when everything would change. She looked at him, trying to find even a trace of love in his eyes, some hint of sincerity. But there was nothing. "Jack, what happened?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Inside, her heart was starting to squeeze, but she tried not to show her fear. Jack took a step forward, his eyes boring into hers with such intensity that Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Sarah, I can't keep hiding this anymore," he said, slamming his fist on the table with rage. "I married you, not because I needed you or because I loved you. I married you for your money. Do you think I haven't noticed how you live? How you spend all your wealth and show it off to everyone? I've been your husband only because you're one of the richest women I've ever met. You thought I loved you? No, you were just a good catch for me." Sarah felt all the strength drain out of her. These words hit her like a punch to the chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She, who had cooked dinners for him, trusted him with her feelings, and opened her soul to him, had just been a pawn for his manipulation, a means to an end. Her mind couldn't process this information. He, her husband, the man with whom she'd been through so much, the one she trusted, had just used her? Was everything they had together meaningless to him? Sarah clenched her lips to stop herself from crying. She looked into Jack's eyes and realized she had nothing left to lose. She had been preparing for this conversation, though she had hoped it would never happen. But now that Jack had said everything out loud, she knew she had to make a decision. This decision had to be final. "You didn't love me." Her voice was quiet but firm. "You've been lying to me from the start, Jack, and now I see that all these years you've been with me only for your own benefit. You and your mother, we've been partners in a game, and you lost." He flinched, as if her words had struck him, but Sarah wasn't going to stop. She could feel her hands trembling with rage, but she kept going. "You used me. You manipulated me, made me feel like I wasn't good enough. You lied to me about love, about the future, when all you wanted was my money. Well, you know what, Jack? I'm not going to be your toy anymore." With those words, she turned and walked toward the door. He lunged at her, but she didn't look back. Sarah walked out without a second glance, letting the tears fall down her cheeks. They weren't tears of pain, but of release. She knew she had made the right choice. Her heart was pounding, but as she closed the door behind her, she felt like she had taken a step in the right direction. Jack was not her person, and she was done being a part of his world. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a heavy feeling, like the previous evening had been a nightmare she had barely survived. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw that the woman standing before her was different. She wasn't the one who had to justify others' expectations or play along with manipulation anymore. She was a woman who had made a decision. And that decision not only changed her life, but also defined her future. Her first action was to change the locks on the house. This was her home, and no one, neither Jack nor his mother, had the right to step into her life without an invitation. When Jack and his mother tried to return and threaten her, her resolve only grew stronger. Mrs. Watson, as always, tried to manipulate the situation, pouring false promises and complaints into Jack's ears. She even threatened to take everything Sarah had earned if she didn't go back to Jack. But Sarah didn't listen. She didn't even bother to respond. She knew her future didn't depend on people who only wanted to use her. She was an independent woman, the owner of her own fate. With each passing day, her decision grew more certain. A month after the divorce, Sarah sat in her office, going over reports when she realized her life was beginning to take on new colors. She was a free woman, and this time, her strength didn't come from wealth, but from self-confidence. Mrs. Watson kept trying to find ways to get her way, but Sarah could feel that this person no longer had any power over her. She had become even more determined, even more resolute. She kept building the company, expanding its horizons, and working with people who valued her not for her money, but for her character and abilities. Sarah hadn't forgotten the lessons she had learned from that broken marriage. Inspired by what she had gone through, she vowed never to let anyone degrade her dignity again. She believed in sincerity, fairness, and the importance of honesty. She knew she deserved better than those who had tried to use her. And despite all the pain that had been a part of her journey, Sarah found her strength in standing up for her values. For her, true happiness was being herself, not being afraid to be vulnerable, and accepting only those who valued her as a person. She was ready for new heights,